Okay. Hi, welcome everybody. Hello. Sorry to keep y'all in the waiting room. Thank you guys for attending the Pipermatics Green Careers Professional Development Workshop. And thank you all for your understanding as we rescheduled it from last week. I'm glad we are meeting today though, because it's May the 4th, which is a special holiday for Star Wars fans. So more reason to celebrate. Here we have our Pipermatics partners. Pipermatics has been an incredible program partner for the Pathways to Clean Energy Careers program. And without further introduction, JP, would you like to take it away?
Sure, I can jump in. Sorry, I was just admitting a few other people in the waiting room there. Apologies. Hi, everyone. Hope everybody's good and healthy and safe and everything else. First of all, please accept my very humble apologies for this being delayed from last week. And thanks for your flexibility and patience. I don't know if Beryl mentioned, I welcomed my second child into the world last Monday. And Lord knows what I was thinking, that I could handle this after 3 days of that. Needless to say, that best laid plans fell by the wayside. So yeah, I'm running on not much sleep as well. So if I forget something or if my English is bad, please again accept my apologies. At some point you may get to meet my new daughter. She may swing by for a visit, we'll see. Cool. Well, yeah, as Beryl mentioned, I work for Pipermatics. I'm one of the founding members of Pipermatics, and I'm the vice president over the contract division. Work with my colleague Alex, who's kindly joined us and given up his time as well. And we are a technical recruitment agency, and we focus and specialize exclusively in the renewable energy and clean tech industries. What that means to us is solar, obviously, hence why we're on this call, but it also covers wind, it covers energy and battery storage, it covers smart grid and grid edge technologies. That would be energy efficiency, sort of, you know, anything that's sort of behind the meter energy efficiencies and things like that, and electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. So we work with companies right across the sort of whole industry, from tracking systems manufacturers such as Nextracker through to, wind turbine OEMs, Siemens Gamesa and Vestas, through to developers such as S-Power, 8 Minute Energy, who you may come across, 7X. We also work with RWE, who are local here to the Austin area. And then through to companies like Harley Davidson. We work with a company out of Boston called Terrafugia, who are developing an electric flying car, if you can believe that, and all sorts of other weird and wonderful companies. So ranging from 10,000 plus employees globally through to 20 people startups. And yeah, it's a very interesting industry. It's very fast moving. It's very forward thinking, and at the heart of it, and this is why we as a business chose to focus on it, is there's a real sense within the industry that we're doing something good, right? I don't want to get into the political elements of it, but hopefully we're all in agreement, given that we're on this call, that something needs doing in terms of how we generate energy and electricity going forward. And what you will find within this business is that everybody is very, very passionate about that mission statement, if you like. So that's really important to us. It's really important to our clients. It's really important to our candidates, and for me, it's the best thing about working in this industry. Alex, do you want to just introduce yourself and let the guys know what it is you do?
Yes, hi, I'm Alex Smith. I started working for Pipermatics. Gosh, now it's been over 2 years, so it feels a lot less than it has been. But yeah, I thankfully got the opportunity to move down here and help JP start up Pipermatics in the Austin office, which has just been exciting. And in that time, just has been able to help lead the solar expansion here in Texas, and then also get to move outside helping clients bring people on from full-time and mainly contract hires. So it's just, it's been a dream to be in the solar industry. Couldn't be more happy with that transition.
Cool, thanks, mate. Right, so the purpose of this meeting, is this a meeting? Is it a workshop? I don't even know. The purpose of this is to talk about some practical tips that we can give you guys as, you know, job seekers, future job seekers, future world changers within this, you know, within this industry. And without making too many assumptions, which I hate myself for saying, so I apologize. I would imagine that, you know, within this call, there's not a ton of experience when it comes to, you know, writing resumes, applying for jobs and interviewing for jobs, at least jobs that are, you know, what you might call a career job. Obviously, please shoot me down if I'm totally wrong on that, by all means. But I wanted to, you know, I want to talk about this in two different ways. I'm going to split this call up into two sections. First, we're going to talk about interviews because that's the most interesting part, and then we're going to talk about resumes because that's really boring and there's not much we can really talk about that's actually going to keep you engaged. So I'll keep that bit as short as possible. But I also want to talk about how I approach interviewing, how I approach it personally when I have had interviews in the past, but probably more pertinently, what I look for in people to join my business. And then I'll talk about it really practically about what's important within the industry itself, in terms of what people look for in renewable energy and solar. And then we'll open it up to questions. Please, if you've got any questions at any point, throw your hands up, interrupt me. I'm not precious about those sort of things. So by all means, just shout out. So the first point I want to sort of bring up, and I purposely talked about my situation at the beginning of before I even introduced myself about having the baby, is because I think it's really, really important when you're in an interview to be as personable as possible and let your personality shine through. Okay, so I could have just very easily just apologized at the start of this call and said, sorry, I couldn't make it. Something came up and moved on. What I did was to try and give you a bit of an insight into, I became a real person for that moment. I talked about my situation, my family, and that, garnered, okay, a couple of people were kind enough to say congratulations in the chat. Straight away, we built a rapport, okay? And that's really, really important. I think it's really easy to get quite nervous in an interview situation. I definitely do it as an interviewer. Not going to lie about that one bit. And I definitely get nervous when I've interviewed in the past, although it's been a little while since I interviewed now, to be fair. And there's no better way to set yourself at ease and to set the interviewer at ease than to bring a bit of your personality and let that shine through. Okay. I think if you take one thing away from this part of the conversation when it comes to interviewing is always remember that the interview is a two-way street. Okay. Yes, a company is interviewing you, 100%. Of course they are. But you are also interviewing that company. You are also interviewing that manager. Do you want to work for them, right? You guys are about to set off on the first step of your career, right? It's really important, especially, if you've made a very conscious decision to go into solar energy, right? That's what you want to do. And you want to ensure that first step on that ladder really brings you into that industry in the right way. And what I mean by that is if you work for the wrong company, the wrong manager, somebody who, maybe their values don't align with your own, maybe there's a personality clash that doesn't work, maybe you don't really, the company mission statement, is it in line with your values? What you might find is that that's going to completely taint your experience of that industry. You may get disillusioned, you may go on a different career path, whatever it might be, right? It's really, really important, because the other part of this is a good manager is responsible for your success, right? If you're going to be successful in your job, you cannot be successful without somebody there to guide you, to mentor you, to teach you. And I genuinely believe, and hopefully Alex will vouch for this, like, I see my personal success as intrinsically linked to the success of my team. So it's so important when you're speaking to a company, when you're speaking to a person that you would potentially work for, that they meet with your expectations as well. So a couple of practical ways you can find that out, right? First of all, make sure you prepare questions when you're going into an interview, right? That's super important, because A, as I say, you're interviewing the company, but B, that has a really awesome effect on the flip side, because that's going to show that you're enthusiastic towards a position, right? If I interview somebody and they can tell me something about my business, or they can ask me a really insightful question that shows me that they've done some research into my business or into the industry that I work in, immediately I'm thinking, this person's excited about this opportunity. Okay, they have taken time out of their own, day, weekend, whatever it is, to go ahead, do some research, think about it, think about what it means to them. And I know that they're serious about this opportunity, right? That is a huge tick in the box for any employer, okay? Basically, when somebody is interviewing you, whether you get that job come down really to two things. Can you do that job, and do you want to do that job, right? And if you give an interviewer any reason to think that you don't want to do that job, then they will run with that opinion. I promise you that. If you do not give them any sort of indication, and I'm not saying you have to be the most outgoing, oh my God, I'm super excited about this, love to work for your company. You don't have to do that. There are all sorts of ways that you can illustrate that without being that, if that's not your personality, to be super outgoing and super energetic and all the rest of it, that's cool. Like, there's all sorts of ways you can show that enthusiasm, and prepping those questions is a key one. Alex will tell you, we've had clients of ours interview somebody. In fact, AES, who are the biggest utility company in the United States, hired one of Alex's candidates purely because he asked, and this is a direct quote, the best question I've ever been asked in an interview. And that, on the strength of that alone, that person got a job offer. Okay, so super important for both sides of it, right? So within that question, how you want to sort of think about those questions is, and what I always tell people, if I'm preparing somebody for an interview, and particularly this is really interesting when you're prepping somebody who's super senior and got 25 years experience and has been working for a company for 15 years and hasn't interviewed in in that amount of time, right? Is they still think of it as that, they don't put themselves in the other seat of like, I've interviewed hundreds of people, what am I looking for? So they don't think about that, which I always find really interesting. But ultimately, when you come out of that interview, and this is how you should formulate your questions, is you should know walking out of that whether you would work for that company or not. Okay. And if you leave any questions on the table, any information that you haven't found out that leave you in any sort of doubt, then you haven't done yourself justice in that interview. Okay. So it's really, really important. Again, that preparation is so critical, because, you might not get the you might be really lucky and you might get 15 companies who all want to hire you for different reasons. And then you've got to find out, okay, you've got to ascertain which is the best opportunity for me. Okay. Who do I want to work with? And if this the best company for you might not be the one you choose, right? So that again, if you've asked all the relevant questions and you can walk out of that interview, or you can close your screen down because most of you will be doing these virtually, and sit there and think, my goodness, I'd love that job. I would love to work for that person. I'd love to work for that company. Then you've interviewed well, right? That's a really good sign that you've interviewed well. Okay. Cool. Any questions to this point before I keep carrying on?
Yes. I actually have a question for you, JP. I actually have a couple of questions. So you mentioned that one of Alex's people asked one of the best questions in an interview. What was that question?
I knew you were going to ask that as soon as you brought that up. Alex, can you remember? Do we even know? Did you find that out?
I knew the question. It was about 2 years ago. So my memory's awful. I can't even remember what I ate for lunch today.
Oh man, I feel like that's like the secret of success, and then it cuts off right before they tell the secret.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. That's really bad, isn't it?
It was definitely along the lines that he reached out to people that worked for AES in the past, and it was basically diving into how the hiring manager's vision for them going into like their O&M practices and safety, like how he sees him into that equation and how he can help implement that out. It was along the lines of that. He did some really good research into the company and reached out to people that knew of the company and the hiring manager.
Well, just a quick follow-up question, I suppose. Are there any questions that you should not ask during an interview, or not ask at all, or not ask during a first interview?
Yes, definitely. I would never ask about compensation in a first round interview. And that's sort of a good segue into what I was going to talk about next, interestingly enough, is around, and I've sort of touched upon it already, is we talk a lot about enthusiasm, and what you will find within solar, and Beryl's a living, breathing, walking, talking example of this. People in solar energy are super passionate about it. And that word passion is so key, okay? And you've all engaged with Beryl, over the course of the last however long, weeks, months, whatever. And if you don't think she's passionate about what she does, I'd be amazed, okay? And that is shared throughout the industry. Everybody you speak to in the industry is going to share that passion, okay? And if somebody walks into an interview and the first question they ask me, we go through the interview and I say, right, okay, have you got any questions? And they say, yeah, what's the base salary? Or what's the bonus structure? Or what's the commission like? My first inclination there, and I'm going to caveat this slightly because I do technically work in sales. So there is an element where having a motivation like that isn't the end of the world. But it's unlikely that the vast majority of you guys would be going into sales, I would imagine. But either way, certainly asking about that compensation. My initial thought is, oh, this person is just looking for a paycheck. And that's not in keeping with what it is I'm looking for in a person to join my business. And I bet you all the money in the world that everybody else in this industry is thinking the same thing. It is so important. We have a client who we work with, just anecdotally here, called Bright Farms, and Bright Farms are, oh gosh, they sort of describe they are building self-sustaining greenhouses to farm salad vegetables, and it's all done hydroponically and very sustainably and very green, sort of green friendly. So all their greenhouses have solar panels. It's all self-sustaining. They recycle rainwater, all this cool stuff. they look for people that they have a phrase called the green mindset. And above all else, their key driver when hiring somebody is, does that person have a green mindset? You know, are they listening to podcasts? Are they, you know, part of any sort of networking groups? Have they done an internship like this one, right? Those sort of things that show that somebody's gone above and beyond just, you know, the run of the mill. Okay, well, I've seen a project manager job advertised. I'm a project manager. I'm going to apply for that, right? Okay, there's 1,000,001 project managers in the world. Are they passionate about the business? Yes, right, brilliant. Does that answer your question? That was a really long answer to a question, wasn't it? Cool. Any other questions? Cool.
Actually, JP, I have one more question.
Yeah, fire away.
So sometimes the first question you get in an interview is just, or it's not even a question of, tell me a little bit about yourself. How would you recommend answering that prompt?
For me personally, I would be super honest. And so let me sort of give you a bit of context here. So within our business, one of the things that I'm quite good at is building relationships with people, and that's what my business is predicated on. And how I tend to do that is to sort of be as vulnerable as I can, or at least as vulnerable as I'm comfortable with, which is ironically a really uncomfortable thing for people to do. But I would always answer that question super honestly, and not be afraid to put a bit of personality into the answer to that question. So, you know, don't go ahead and tell somebody that, you know, on a weekend you like to go out with all your friends and get absolutely blitzed on Rainy Street, and that's your favorite pastime. Like, you know, keep it within the confines of something that's relatively professional. But again, I would, you know, tell them about your background, where, you know, I'm originally from, you know, wherever. Clearly I'm originally from the UK, right? So I would probably start with that. I grew up in a small market town. It's an old Roman settlement. It actually, interestingly, used to be the capital of the UK for a very short period of time. The castle ruins there. I moved to the States in 2011. I've been here ever since, met my wife here. I've got 2 kids. Well, I've now got 2 kids, both Texans. And, you know, I love the solar industry. I'm super passionate about it. And I'm really interested in learning about your business. I might say something like that. And that's super honest. Straight away, what you'll find there is the interviewer, 99 times out of 100, and obviously, you know, there is an element of sort of reading the vibe there. If you walk in and somebody's suit and tie and everything else, you might want to keep it a little bit more professional, but that's very, very rare. You're going to come across that these days. So something like that, all of a sudden the interviewer is going to drop their guard as well and think, oh my God, this person, super open, rapport's built straight away, and that will set the tone for the rest of the interview. Cool. That about sort of covers it really for interview, in terms of how, you know, how you would carry yourself and conduct yourself. The only other point I really want to sort of drive home on the interview side of things is how you answer questions. And it's really important to think about this, because especially, you know, you're all students currently, you know, the vast majority of you, if not all of you, are going to be walking into these interview situations with no real practical work experience. And as you develop through your career, your interviews will be a lot of it will be talking about what you did in previous jobs, right? Obviously, you haven't got that experience to lean on. So it's really important when you're answering questions that you answer them directly about yourself, and you're able to articulate with good solid examples of what you actually did. And I always refer back here to project work. You know, I'm sure you guys are doing a lot of project work through your studies and through your degree programs and whatnot. And oftentimes people sort of tend to revert to almost being too humble in these situations. And when they're working as part of a team and a project team, they'll talk about the team and we as the collective. We did this, we did that, we did this, which resulted in that, and this was the outcome, and this was the success that resulted in that. That's great to an extent, but as an interviewer, I want to know what you did and what part you played within that team. Were you the team leader? You know, were you the one who was pulling everybody together and, you know, ensuring everybody kept on track and kept sight of the end goal, things like that, that you can really highlight what you've done, you know, because it's really, and we'll talk about this shortly when we talk about resumes, it's really hard on a resume to get across what you do, right? And I read, gosh, hundreds of resumes a week, probably. And I still find it very, if I had to write my resume now, it would take me days to do it. It's an awful process. It's really difficult because you've sort of got to throw yourself out there and be your own champion. And, you know, obviously being a Brit, that's something I'm not particularly comfortable with anyway. But also it's, you know, it's quite hard to pinpoint exactly what it is that you've done if you're trying to keep it within a certain amount of length or whatever. An interview is a really great opportunity to shout about yourself and tell people what it is that you've actually achieved personally. So when you are answering those questions, absolutely make sure they're in the first person. You're referring to things that you actually did. Come prepared with examples where, you know, somebody might ask you a super like generic question is, you know, give me an example of when you played an integral part of, you know, of being a team player or something crap like that. And it seems like a really simple question. It's quite a hard question to answer actually, if you're going to do it effectively. So think about these examples where you can illustrate that. And then be really succinct with your answers. And this is going to be ironic coming from me because I waffle, clearly. I'm just talk and talk and talk. And Alex will vouch for that. I overtalk so much. But again, you know, it's really easy, particularly when you're nervous in that interview setting, to carry on talking and you lose track of where you've been and where you're going. And eventually what you find is you end up talking a lot, but you don't really answer the question. You know, you'll hear me, I'll even say to people like, that was a really long answer to a very short question. To kind of catch myself out a little bit. But try to be as succinct as possible when answering questions, especially very direct questions. Cool. Before we move on from interviews, any final questions on anything interview based?
Hi. Yeah, I actually had a bit of a question piggybacking off of what you said about people sometimes having a tendency to be too humble in their resumes. Mm-hmm. So in interviews, I've been in situations before where interviewers will ask a question like, what are your weaknesses? Or like other questions that you can find like articles online where it's like, answer it so that your weakness is actually one of your strengths or whatnot. And that seems a little cheesy to me because I kind of feel like if I were in their shoes, I would want to see like an ability to genuinely assess your own faults. One of the questions I got asked recently was if you're faced with a situation where you have two different things that you need to accomplish, and both of them are like of the highest priority, what would you do in that scenario? And while it's not quite as as directly like a what are your weaknesses question. I wasn't really able to find a great answer to that. So what I came up with was I came up with a situation where I essentially like divvied up the work in a team. But I was wondering after that if maybe, I guess just about interviewers' thoughts on a candidate like sort of trying to sidestep a question rather than just being like upfront and honest. Like, what are your
great. That's a really great question. Never be afraid to show weakness, first of all. So if, for me personally, if I ask somebody, what are your weaknesses? And I do ask that question in interviews in a not so direct manner. I ask people to give me, and I ask this question twice. I ask people to give me an example of when they failed, and then people will give me a prepared answer that they thought about, because that weakness question kind of comes up, and then ask it again. I'll ask for a second example and see what comes out on the fly, because then I get a really honest answer. Okay. And if somebody tries to spin that, as you rightly pointed out, is like in a very cheesy manner of, okay, well, I'm going to show this as a way to illustrate my strength. Like somebody might say, oh, I care too much, or I get too personally invested in things, and they sort of think that that's a positive, but actually it's a huge turnoff for an interview. I think self-assessment is a really critical skill in any job, regardless of whether you're on the first step of the rung or you're a CEO of a business. If you can't assess yourself and establish where you're weak, you'll never be successful, because how can you ever improve, right? One of the things that one of the reasons why I took this job with Piper Maddox, and I was in a fortunate position where I had a number of offers at the time, is I read an article by he's now our chairman, actually. He's stepped down as our CEO. He's no longer playing an active role in the business. But he had just won Entrepreneur of the Year in the UK in the recruitment world, 2 years running. And one of the questions in the article was, why do you think you're so successful? And his response was, because I know what I'm not very good at, and I surround myself with people who are better at the things that I'm bad at than me. And I was like, oh my goodness, like that's so, first of all, it's super honest. And second of all, it's like so refreshing that somebody who's clearly very successful was willing to look at themselves, make an honest assessment and say, I'm really bad at this. I'm going to find somebody who's really good at this to do that part of my job. Right, and allocate that thing. So to answer the second part of your question, but I think you've actually given a really good answer there. That's exactly what I would do if I'm faced with in that scenario. I've got two equal things. You can't do that yourself. It's impossible, right? Something has to take priority. And if we take that question dead literally, and you say, well, they're of equal priority, then you need to allocate that amongst the team. I think where you can probably bolt onto that, if you ever ask that question again, is you then act as a central point, as a liaison to drive that and ensure that both projects are getting equal attention, they're both moving at the same pace, and you can act as a conduit between, the stakeholders who you're deliverable to and the people you've got supporting. Great question, though.
Thank you so much for the answer. It was really insightful.
No worries. I'm really sorry, whoever wrote the question. Could you pronounce your name for me, because I don't want to say that wrong. Granique, is that right? Have I got that right? I'm going to take silence as complicit agreement. So thank you. Some of the general questions you'll be asked in an interview. Well, Kevin just touched on one. You'll probably get asked what your strengths are as well. Quite honestly, what you see your strengths are. You will more than likely be asked why you're interested in the job. That all comes down to your preparation. right? If you can really succinctly articulate why you're interested in a company and a particular opportunity, that'll go a real long way. What else? You might be asked, and I don't know if people ask this so much nowadays, but you could well be asked, where do you see yourself in the next 12 months, 3 years, 5 years? That's a fairly common question. What else do I what do I ask in every interview?
Do you ever ask, I've only received this question once in an interview, and I always wonder if it was actually normal, of if they ask what other companies you're interviewing with, or
So yeah, that is. So I asked that question in interviews, and I think I wouldn't say it's crazy common, but it can definitely come up. I think if a company, you know, if I go back to that Bright Farms example, Bright Farms might ask that question as an indicator as to how committed to this industry is somebody. So, like, for example, when I ask that question, we're a recruitment business. If I ask somebody where else they're interviewing and they reel off 4 companies that are all in a completely different area, but are all in the same area, and then they're interviewing with me, straight away, I'm thinking this person doesn't want my job, right? They don't want to work for my business. They've they've got themselves into this interview situation, but really they want to be doing something in this cluster of, you know, industry space over here. Let's say they're interviewing with 4 medical sales companies, and then they're interviewing with me. Like, why do they want to work in recruitment when all their other interviews are in a different industry? So you might get asked that. It's I would never be afraid to answer that on openly and honestly, quite frankly. Like, there's you know, if you get into the psychology of things here, you know, like within when you're dating, right? If somebody's unavailable, sort of makes you want them a little bit more, doesn't it? Like, I'm sure we've all experienced that. Same thing in the job search. If I'm interviewing somebody and I know that 4 other companies want to hire that person, straight away I want to hire that person more. Because if 4 others want to hire them, then I'm like, holy crap, they must be really good. Like, I want them in my business.
we actually have a question right now in the chat box that's kind of the flip side of that, of what if no other companies have contacted you for an interview? How should you answer the question in that case? And that's from Maria.
So again, first of all, be honest. Tell them that you're not interviewing elsewhere yet. And that's the key word, is yet. And then feel free to talk about the other applications that you've made. Just because one company's, you know, that company might have moved really quickly and invited you in for an interview. You know, if I get a resume in front of me that I like the look of for my team, like, I'll set up an interview as quickly as humanly possible. As soon as I'm available and the candidate's available, I'll have that person in for interview. Not every business is able to be as agile as that, right? It might take a little bit. You may be going through a HR process and it takes a long time to pan out. So I would talk about it in those terms. So again, be honest, not interviewing anywhere yet, but I've got a number of applications out that I'm expecting to hear back from over the course of the next week. Something like that. There was another question in the chat there. What's the first thing you notice of an interviewee? Because first impressions are important. That's a really good question. And it's something, it's actually really, this might be a long answer, so I apologize, strap yourselves in. Because it's really pertinent right now, because there's an awful lot of sort of focus on unconscious biases when it comes to interviewing. And as a recruitment business for various reasons. A, because we can advise our clients on it, and B, because we interview a lot of candidates for our business. We've done a lot of external training about how those things manifest themselves, and what you need to be on the lookout for. And actually, if you would have asked me that question maybe even 5 years ago, I'd have probably had a really different answer to what I do now. I think that in terms of, you know, what I'm really looking for when I interview somebody is has somebody made an effort, right? I think that's probably the main thing. Is if you look like you've just rolled out of bed, then my first impression of you is you don't care about this interview. You're not bothered. Like, this is just not important to you. It's not important enough for you to take a shower or, you know, run a comb through your hair. I mean, I haven't brushed my hair today. I'm wearing a white tee, like, but at least I'm, you know, dare I say I'm put together. You might disagree with that, quite honestly, but that would be my thing now. Like I say, and again, I'm you know, obviously British. My industry doesn't have a great reputation for how, you know, some of the practices we've had in the past of, like, I mean, when I was in my first recruitment job in 2007, I had to be freshly shaved every day. If I had like, now I've got a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. If I walked into my first recruitment job in this, they had a razor in the bathroom and I had to go shave, which is utterly ridiculous. And obviously the world's changed a lot, but yeah, like I say, you don't have to, don't worry about suits, ties, shirts, anything like that. Just look like you've made an effort and you care about being there and you care about that opportunity. That's the biggest thing. Does that answer that question? I don't know what I've done here, Beryl, but I've absolutely wrecked my chat box here. I don't know if there's any other chats that anybody. Oh, I'll tell you what I've done. Ah, there we go. Sorry.
I think we have a couple other questions in there.
Yeah. So, is it good or bad idea to bring up personal beliefs or ethics that drives you, even if the interviewer may not hold the same values? That is a really good question, Elliot.
Thank you.
No worries, no worries. So on the whole, I would say it is a bad idea. And how I approach this is the same way that if you and I, you know, met in a bar and we just got to talking and we, you know, mutual friends or whatever, and we were hanging out and getting to know each other, I probably wouldn't bring up like my political beliefs on, you know, purely because I don't know what yours are, and I don't want to offend you by saying something that, because I don't know what's going to offend you, right? You know, I don't know how strongly you hold your beliefs. For example, you might be a person of faith, I may not be, and I might say something that leaves you with a negative impression of me. That said, there is an element here of, you know, we're working in an industry that's actually, it's sort of politically charged, but it's also very bipartisan, and for various reasons. You know, job creation, it's green, all the rest of it. There's loads of reasons why renewable energy is a you know, a sort of, well, it's a bipartisan issue, right? But for the most part, so again, I'll give you a really direct example. I'm currently working with a company who are a startup company in home energy storage solutions, and they interviewed somebody just 2 weeks ago. And the CEO of the company is from New York City. He's super direct, and he's just a typical New Yorker. And he got talking to one of the candidates, and the candidate said to him, well, I moved to California because I'm a political rebel and I want to bring down the establishment, and, you know, we're gonna beat the Republicans, and, you know, we're gonna proliferate green energy, and that's, you know, that's what I want to do. And in some ways that's kind of checking a box, because it's like, well, yeah, you're passionate about renewable energy, that's awesome, but you also have no idea what the interviewer's feeling on that front, right? So I would treat it in the same way you would if you just met a random person. Like if you met Carmen, for example, and you guys got to talking, like, would you go straight into talking about your political beliefs? No, you probably wouldn't. You might get to that point over the course of a couple of hours, but if you go into it with that mindset, that's the safest bet, honestly. Cool. Does that answer your question, Elliot?
Yeah.
Any follow up on that?
So I've learned my lesson with not bringing up too many politics, but actually the thing that I tend to bring up when going for sustainability jobs, which I might be disregarding the advice you just gave by bringing it up, but I've talked about veganism in the past and how that has led in my personal life with making these kinds of career and educational choices. And I know that there can be a stereotype that goes with that. And if that's a professional thing to bring up, even though it proves kind of my passion on the subject.
So in fairness, no, and I'm glad, like, thank you for sort of challenging me with that example, because in something like that, and you can do that, you can do that very tactfully, right? I think it's all about the delivery here. You know, if you do it in the way that the example I gave you of, like, I moved to California because I'm a, you know, political rebel and I'm going to bring down the establishment, like, you sort of projecting your views outwardly, right? And potentially, you know, making judgments on others, albeit subconsciously, for not holding the same views. But if somebody says to you, Elliot, why would this job be important to you? Why do you think you'd be good at this job? And you turn around and say, well, actually, it's because I'm, you know, I practice veganism and sustainability. You know, one of my main drivers behind that was sustainability and the impact that, you know, beef farming has on the environment and everything else. And actually, I'm really passionate about, you know, putting my efforts and my energies into helping that cause as much as possible. That's why I think it'd be a great fit for this job. That's a really great way of answering it. You've given a great answer. You've established your beliefs in the sense, but you've just done it in a very personal way, right? That's really intrinsic to you, and you use it as an example, as opposed to saying, well, I'm vegan and that's really important to me, and quite honestly, I can't believe anybody would ever eat meat because it's so bad for the environment. Well, you're making judgments within that statement, right? And there's a delivery element there. So yeah, I think in that example, you're absolutely correct to bring that up, as long as it's I suppose the key point there is it's relevant to the actual interview process.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that. I will keep that in mind.
No worries. Right, Maria, before I went back to school, sorry, I'm going to read out loud. I'm not a very good reader. I'm not sure I get a parking ticket to the bus. Interesting. That so that's another good question. I don't know that I ever had personally. I have a really hard time with that question because I would never judge somebody for getting on the bus, and I hope that reflects well on me. But I'm surprised by that advice, first of all. But yeah, it's. So I'm going to answer this really honestly, Maria. I don't think that's an issue at all, and I would honestly say if you ever interviewed with a company and the interviewer judged you on that basis, that is not a company you should be working for. That's, to me, screams of a negative culture within that business. So I would never ever be afraid if somebody, I mean, if it even came up of how you got there, then 100% yeah, I took the bus in, or I rode my bike. Like, yeah, that would be a huge red flag for me. If somebody asked me that and then judged me on that, you shouldn't be working for that business. There you go. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Rui, with the transition to remote work, a lot of companies are doing virtual interview via chat, video call. Particularly feel a lot more. Would it be inappropriate to ask if switching was supposed to be a phone call? Not at all. That is not inappropriate. I think so. It's really interesting. You know, I won't labor this point, but Alex and I work in sales, and a lot of our work is done over the phone. And actually, our job is a lot harder when it's done over the phone versus face to face. It's a lot easier to build rapport with somebody if you can see their reactions. You know, you can, you know, you might hear people talk about mirroring, which is, you know, where if you're somebody who's quite reserved, but you interview with somebody who's really high energy, you know, you would want to sort of push yourself a little bit to be in a bit more high energy, and that person will naturally bring themselves down to mirror you a little bit. A lot easier to do that on a VC than it is on the phone. And I think I can't imagine a scenario where somebody would react badly to that. In fact, I think they'd react really positively. I know I would if I had a telephone interview scheduled with somebody and they said, actually, would it be possible to do a VC? I'd prefer that. I'd be like, yeah, 100%. Like, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Right, I think that covers everybody's questions. So thank you for some brilliant questions, actually. That's the best group we've had, Beryl, for questions.
Yeah,
So,
I agree there.
So I think you are going to have a hard time with all your interviews based on that over the next few days. So well done, everybody. Thank you. Right, I'm going to talk about resumes now, and I'm going to start by apologizing for how boring this subject is. There's no way I can glamorize it. I've tried. This is the fourth time we've run this now, and I feel like actually I get more boring every time I do it, rather than more interesting, ironically. Oh, crikey, Beryl, have you just, okay, that's a summation of,
oh yeah, don't worry.
Oh.
It's not,
It's like, hang on, we're here all night answering all those questions. So resumes. So you're going to throw this out there and try and make this a little bit more interactive. Feel free to either put in the chat or just shout out like some of the things that you've been advised to this point of how your resume should be. Is there anything that sort of you've been told, and there are some real sort of archetypes out there as to what an ideal resume should look like, and I'm going to agree with a couple of those and challenge a couple of those. So what are some things that people have been told about how their resume should be? Okay. Cool. Power words. Interesting. Cool. So I'll just go through. I'll go through them in order, and we'll talk about each one because there's some super relevant ones, and some that I'm, like I say, I'm going to challenge. So start each bullet point with action verbs. So yes, in short, that is advisable. 100%. I would always, you know, a lot of time you'll see words like responsible for, created a, you know, delivered such and such, whatever it is. So yeah, I personally like that. If you've got the ability to do that in terms of what your experience has been, that's a really good one. Lucy, not longer than 1 page. I don't have an issue with it being longer than 1 page. So when it comes to formatting, how people think about it, the psychology of a resume goes that in the first half a page, a reader will make their mind up if they're going to continue reading, and they will read no more than 3 pages. So I don't have an issue with it being longer than 1 page, particularly if it's going to be to the detriment of getting everything on there that you've done. You know, if you're trying to keep it on 1 page, but really you've got a page and a half and you cut half a page out, that's only going to be to your detriment, right? It's more important to get that half a page of relevant information on than it is to try and keep it on 1 page. So I don't worry too much about that, quite honestly. Simple format, 100%. Yeah, you want to make it as easy. It's got to be as easy on the eye as possible, right? If you think about the hiring process these days, more and more you're going through, you know, you probably seeing jobs and applying for jobs on LinkedIn, or maybe on Indeed.com, on companies' websites, particularly the bigger companies who are going to get literally hundreds and hundreds of applications. If your resume is difficult to read, then it's just not going to get read. And that's a sad reality of the fact, is you want it to be as easy on the eye as possible, without a doubt. Kevin, 100% correct, most relevant and recent at the top. Do it in, you know, in chronological order, or rather, I guess, reverse chronological, in the sense that your most recent goes first and then you work backwards. Elliot, black and white. Yeah, I can deal with a little bit of color and a little bit of formatting, but honestly, and unless you're applying for a job with a weird and wonderful startup in Silicon Valley, you know, you see resumes on LinkedIn all the time about, oh, I got this resume through, it's amazing, and it's like a cartoon or something. Like, nah, not for me. I think just, again, keep it simple, keep it relevant. Diana, power words, yeah, to an extent, but I think you've got to be careful of overdoing it. If you go crazy on that, it's going to come across as probably a little bit disingenuous. So do be sort of careful of that. Not too crammed, Caroline, 100%. Yeah. Good formatting is critical. I'm going to show you some examples here shortly, so you can see what I'm talking about. Maria, I've heard conflicting advice about how high your GPA should be for you to put it on there. So I'm going to enlist Alex's help here, because I don't even know what GPAs mean, if I'm honest, being a Brit. We have class degrees, and you either get a first class, a second class, and then there's second class first, second class second, and then a third. And GPA, I know a 4.0 is like as good as you can get. So Alex, do you want to just?
Yeah. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So I was actually advised out of college to not put my GPA on my resume. Basically, because when you put that on there, you're going to be judged probably one or two ways. If you've got a 4.0 GPA, then people are going to be questioning, you know, what you are outside of schoolwork. And on the flip side, if you've got, you know, under a 3 point, people are going to be questioning if you're smart enough to do the job. So I was advised to leave it off, because I mean, I wasn't like a world beater in my GPA, but I also was a college athlete, managing other things. So I was advised from a consulting firm that I worked with for an internship to not put GPA down at all, but show your extracurricular activities on your college rather than anything about grades. Show that you did work at school outside of just your classwork, and that you can manage multiple things. Because that, in the end, that matters more than your grade point average. Because if I'm being completely honest, I don't think I've used any of my classes one time in the real world. So if that helps.
Cool.
I think one in between I've seen there is I've seen folks who've not included their GPA, but who have included like summa cum laude or cum laude, which usually has a GPA cutoff. So I think that that's sometimes an in between I see.
Yeah, I think probably the most relevant thing to bear in mind there is that very, very rarely, if ever, will you see a GPA requirement on a job advertisement. No business is looking for a specific GPA. Again, they want to know, can you do the job and do you want to do the job? You know, the difference between a 3.2 and a 3.6 might be quite a lot in real terms, but in terms of your ability to do the job and your desire to do the job, it doesn't mean a great deal. So I would again, with, you know, to Alex's point, I would definitely err on the side of leaving it off, quite honestly. Don't talk about what you did, but instead talk about what you've done to benefit the company. So I would challenge that slightly, and I would say do both on that. Definitely talk about what you've done to benefit the company, but also talk about what you actually delivered. And again, I'm gonna show you some really good examples here shortly of you know, of exactly that. You must put your aspiration / goal in the beginning. So I think that, and again, you know, go back to that point about the first half a page. I decide if I'm going to continue reading a resume. What I want to see, and when I first open a resume, is a really nice summary of what someone's done in the past, what they're doing currently, and what they want to do. So you talk about the aspiration piece. Yes, 100%. Definitely want to see that, right? And that is particularly pertinent for you guys. Becomes less relevant the deeper you get into your career. Still remains relevant, but for you guys who enter into the job market for the first time, 100% really important. I heard conflicting things about having a professional summary at the top. Some have told me it's unprofessional. Some have told me it's nice. Interesting that people have told you that having a professional summary is unprofessional. I find that quite ironic in some ways. I disagree wholeheartedly with it being unprofessional. I think it's critical. Honestly, I think, you know, these days more and more cover letters are becoming a bit of a dying thing. It's not often you'll get asked for a cover letter. Your profile summary is, again, what you've been doing, what you're doing, what you want to do. Super important. Cool, Beryl, that's not a question. That's you telling me you've sent me your resume, which I've got. I'm about to show everybody. Emphasis on grammar and punctuation, 100%. And like that is, again, you talk about like first impressions, like the resume is the real first impression, right? It's the first interaction I'm going to have with you. With the, you know, assuming that you've done your resume on some sort of Microsoft package or any package, you've got access to a spelling check that does it automatically. If you can't be bothered to run through that, my goodness, like all sorts of red flags, attention to detail, you know, actual effort that you've taken. Yeah, 100%. That's critical. Don't have your address listed. Now that's an interesting one. I would agree with that. I wouldn't put my address on. What I would put is Austin, Texas. Right. So what you got to think about there is, where are you applying to a job, right? Assuming you're applying to a job that's in the place that you currently reside, you want to show the employer that you are at least local, because if having to relocate, and I've learned this the sort of hard way, clearly, because I've relocated a bunch, but having to relocate in the US for a job is not uncommon, right? And it's definitely not uncommon in renewable energy because it's just so spread out geographically in the United States. There is no hub for renewable energy or solar energy. That said, if I as an employer know that I'm not going to, you know, potentially incur costs for you to relocate, or conversely, and again, I'm going to show you an example of this shortly, I don't have to worry about the fact that you might get cold feet about relocating through the process, and I might invest a lot of time and effort into you for it to ultimately, you know, not transpire to you taking my job, then that's a bonus. But I wouldn't put your address on there. What you do need to put on there is a way to contact you. You'd be amazed at the amount of resumes that we get where there's no phone number and there's no email address, and I'm like, how the hell do you expect me to talk to you about my job if I can't get hold of you? So cell phone number, email address, critical, but I wouldn't put my address on. I would just put the city where I am, basically. So I heard some people say it's better to submit Word docs and others PDF. That's interesting. For me, it's really important that you send me a resume in Word, because how I upload you to my database, it doesn't read in PDF, so it makes my life a lot easier if it's Word document. That said, on the flip side, we send our resumes out to our clients in PDF, and I think PDF is, just from a formatting perspective, looks a lot nicer. So I would always convert it to PDF personally. Cool. So yeah, most of those things, like I say, pretty accurate. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you guys a couple of resumes. Two of them are Beryl's. So she's very kindly put herself on the chopping block for us. I'm going to show you her old one. I think I'm getting them the right way around, Beryl. The old one's got the blue on it, right?
Yeah, there's a funky one from college y'all are gonna see, so.
Right. So the funky one from college, for me, is a bad example. And the newer one is a really good example. And then I'm going to show you an example of a chief operations officer resume that I sent out to a client of mine a couple of weeks ago, and show you exactly, it's going to show you how I've formatted it to make it as sort of punchy as possible, but also some of the information that person is going to involve in it. Oh, where are we? Share screen. Make sure I share the right one. Yep, share, and then let's go to. All right, here we go. This is Beryl's. Can everybody see that, by the way? Cool. Right, so this is Beryl's, in her own words, funky version. And you know, in practice, in principle, it's got all the relevant information, right? Current job, what she's been doing previously, you know, a nice reverse chronological order, what she's done, contact details, social, interests. I'm not opposed to putting interests on. That's entirely up to you. I think in our industry can be nice.
I actually haven't looked at the interests in years, and so this is actually a little bit embarrassing. So please, yeah, don't.
Did you ever achieve writing the perfect phrase?
I never did.
Interest.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So you say it's your interest, and then straight away I've found out you're not that interested in it. So, so yeah, like if I'm looking at that, I've got to, as an employer, as a potential employer, I've got to work really hard to work out what it is Beryl's doing, what she's done, and really what she wants to do, right? I mean, she wants to stay really busy, but also sleep a lot. So that straight away, I'm thinking, I'm not sure she's the right person for my business. But then let's look at her newer resume and look at the difference there straight away. So again, I know Beryl's put her address on, and we just sort of talked about that. I would personally just drop that particular portion out. Not an issue. She's got a nice little summary, right? Tells you a little bit about Beryl, very, very direct, straight in. And then this formatting just makes it super easy, right? Name of the company, job title, what she did, okay, collaborated with marketing team to effectively cultivate brand awareness, project, represented company, managed event setup, dates on there, right? That looks great. Oh, easy tiger, I really like that spot. Education, great. Extracurricular, great. Additional information, great. Okay, that is a good looking resume. Okay, that's a really good example of a good resume. The only thing I would do there, and hopefully Beryl's not in the job market. She's doing a really good job at what she's doing now and enjoying it, I think. But I would build this bit out, okay? And I'm about to show you. And again, bear in mind that this is a COO of somebody who's got 30 years experience. So it's going to be very different to you guys, but it's the format that I want you to focus on. So this is a guy, this is how we format our resumes. So this personal summary is my words, okay? So this is based on the conversation I've had with him, and super important, everything within this profile summary is super relevant to the job he's applying to. Okay, so that's something to think about. Do not, like, I was going to say don't be afraid to, but you should be afraid about doing this. When I was in my first recruitment job, if I had a job description, I would read through that. If I'm speaking to, you know, Brianna, and I'm qualifying her for a job, and I say, Brianna, have you done this, you know, created pivot tables within Microsoft Excel? And you say, yeah, I've done that. And that's what it says in the job description. I would literally put exactly that in your resume because it's super relevant to the job that you're applying to, okay? So don't be afraid to play about with this summary profile a bit, right? Elliot, you talked earlier about applying for sustainability jobs. Potentially, you know, there's other ways you can support that industry in your career by not just doing a job directly in sustainability. So you might have one resume that you send specifically for like a sustainability engineer role. But let's say if you did something like, you know, maybe you went into environmental policy that's sort of related, but not directly, you might have a slightly different summary that would play on different elements of your interests to that. So don't be afraid to change it up based on the role you're advertising for. So you can ignore this part. So the reason I've put that in, I just want to caveat this because I know I talked earlier about not talking about it. I've been given a budget by my client to work to that they need to know that this person fits within to be able to go forward. That's why I've put that in. Selwyn himself didn't have that in, nor would I ever let him keep it in if it wasn't going through that process. Okay, so just bear that in mind. And then from here, this is all his words. Okay, so career highlights first of all. Like, again, obviously it's super impressive, but it's all super relevant to the job that he's going to be doing. He is a COO, right? So all these points. So if I'm the hiring manager and I'm recruiting for a COO and I read this and I go, okay, wow, yeah, he sounds really good. Career highlights. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Let me see what he's done. Right, okay, he was chief operating officer at Aquamet. Brilliant, right? And even then, this is a guy who has, oh, Lord knows how much experience. To be fair, I've not done a very good job here with these dates. It's really hard to see. So lesson learned for me. But clearly this guy's got a lot of experience, right? You can all see that. It's only 2.5 pages, right? There's not a crazy amount of information. And this is a guy who could probably write a book on all the things he's done. So that's a really good example, with the exception of my bad formatting with the dates, please excuse that, of a really great resume, okay? So on the back of that, any additional questions? Let me stop sharing my screen here. I don't know if you can hear my daughter shouting me downstairs there, sorry. Cool. Anything else that anybody wants to deep sleep? Yeah, that's funny. Cool. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by my daughter. Any questions?
I have one. I don't know like how prevalent it is, but like how should you approach asking about boundaries between like work and personal life within an interview or something like that?
Good question. So am I right in saying that it's work-life balance that you're interested in?
Yeah. Like if I was to ask that in an interview, like how should I format that to not like make it seem like I'm not interested, just like expanding or like seeing what opportunities are out for that.
Yeah, good question. I would ask what a typical work week looks like for somebody doing that job. So if I was to get this position, could you talk to me about what a typical work week might look like? And then you'll get an idea of like, you know, they might talk about, sorry. Hi everybody, this is my baby girl. And she calls me Baba. Sorry for the interruption. See ya, bye. She's covered in spaghetti. Gosh, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, so if you ask them to talk you through the typical work week, and if they start talking about, you know, well, you know, you'll probably get to the office at like 7 a.m. and you'll leave the office at like 6:30, and you know, on Saturdays we usually come into the office for a couple of hours. Straight away you can start building a picture of what the culture of that job is like, and ultimately, because you raise a great point, Nina. If you go and say like, I'm really interested in work-life balance, I don't want to be working too much, they're going to go, yeesh. But on the flip side, it's a really valid question. It's a really important question for you, and knowing, you know, you don't want to, nobody wants to work in a job that consumes you for, you know, 20 hours a day, unless you want to go and be a Wall Street trader, and then in which case you're probably in the wrong place anyway, ultimately. Cool. Anything else? Should we put skills on resume? Beryl, absolutely right. Yeah, definitely put technical skills on there, particularly if it's relevant to the job description. If you're applying for a job that requires, you know, C++ experience, Python experience, you know, Simulink, MATLAB, whatever it is, 100% get that on there. How can we optimize our resume so that tracking systems flag the resume out of hundreds of so probably the best way, is it Rui or is it David? I'm so bad at
okay. The first name is Rowie and the last name. Yes, sir.
Rowie, thank you, Rowie. So that's a really good question, and it's really relevant these days, and especially if you are applying to bigger organizations where, you know, for example, and you're probably not, well, having said that, Elliot might apply to an Amazon, and because they have a ton of sustainability officers and things in their business, but most of us here are not going to be applying to super massive organizations of that nature. But there are some big organizations in renewable energy, right? Things that people like RWE or, you know, Next Era, if you ever heard of those guys, or Duke Energy, the biggest utility in the United States. You know, thousands and thousands of people getting hundreds of applicants for jobs. The key there is keywords. So what you're going to have to get sort of attuned to is, when you're looking at jobs that you're interested in, is getting really good at scanning those job descriptions and picking out what look like to be the keywords. So, you know, for example, if you were applying to be an electrical engineer, right, straight away electrical and engineer are going to be keywords, but you might have HV, you might have AC/DC, you might have like MW and megawatts. You know, there's all sorts of things that would be relevant. You know, again, if you're an electrical engineer and you've got solar experience and you're applying for a solar job, then solar is clearly going to be a keyword. Make sure that that word appears as many times as possible on your resume. And that way, because I'll certainly do this if it's a hyper technical role that I don't necessarily understand intrinsically, which happens quite often because I'm not a technical expert in any of the jobs I recruit for. I'll do a control F on a document, and if that word jumps out at me 100 times, I'm like, holy cow, this person is experienced in that particular skill. So that's definitely a good tip on that side of things. Elliot, if you like a lot of professional, small, how do you create a well-rounded resume that supports your first? Right, that's a great question, and that's probably the most relevant question for us to answer here today. And this is where that profile summary becomes critical for you guys, right? As I said to you earlier on when we were talking about interviewing, you know, when people really interview somebody, they're interviewing on the basis of, can this person do the job and do they want to do the job? And that translates directly to your resume. So the resume, how you should think about a resume is its only purpose is to get you an interview. Once you get the interview, you can talk and talk and talk about how great you are, how relevant you are, how passionate you are, all that stuff. Really hard to put that in, you know, a page and a half, 2 pages, 1 page, whatever it is, right? So that for me is where that profile summary just becomes critical, right? Remember, that's the first thing that somebody's going to see on your resume. They're going to see your name, they're going to see your contact details, and they're going to see the summary, because that's what, you know, you open a document and that's what hits you. And if I read that and it says, you know, because you raise a great point, right? You're not going to come to the table with a ton of practical experience. So you've got to use that portion of it for me, for Beryl, for, you know, whoever it is the potential hiring manager to look and go, my goodness, this person is somebody I want to speak to. There's enough there that I just want to speak to this person, and that then you've done the job, right? It's not necessarily about the fact that you've, you know, like Beryl, you worked at Easy Tiger, or wherever it was, right? That's not all that relevant, really. At your stage in your career, what any practical work experiences show in me, regardless of how relevant it is for the job you're applying for, is that it's shown some drive, some determination, some resiliency, and some independence, that you've gone out and you've actually worked, right? That's the main thing that it's illustrating. Beyond that, what I'm looking for is why are you interested in my job, right? Why do you want to do my job? Like, again, I'm sorry, Elliot, I'm picking on you because you gave a really good example, but you know, you talked about sustainability and it's a genuine passion of yours, right? And I'm not saying that you should, you know, start your resume off as you're an actively practicing vegan as your opening gambit, but certainly there's enough there that you could put together a really great summary that if I'm, you know, recruiting for an entry-level sustainability officer and you haven't done that job before, but you hit me with a profile summary I'm super passionate about it. My studies have been focused around it. I genuinely care about it on a personal level. I'm thinking this is somebody who, if I hire them, they'll do a good job, because that's ultimately all any hiring manager wants, right? That's all an employer wants, is somebody who comes and does a good job for them. And where we've got a real advantage in our industry is that person who's reading your resume is really going to care about what they're doing. They're going to be really passionate about it. And if you can illustrate that in some way, then straight away there's a common ground, and I'm going to go, Elliot, I've got to speak to Elliot about the sustainability job, right? I've got to hear what her story is. I want to learn more about her. I want to learn what she can bring to my business. And sorry, Elliot, ironically, it was you that asked that question as well. Cool. Does that answer your question? Is that cool?
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
No worries. I've been told to use jobscan.com to compare it to the job application. Can delete cookies, bypass 5 scan. It should help others. Interesting. That is something that I wasn't aware of. But if there is a tool for you to do that, definitely utilize that. So Ken, that is really good advice to everybody. Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. If your resume mirrors the job description, you know, oftentimes, and again, this will become more relevant as you move through your careers, we'll send, you know, Alex and I will send a job description to a candidate and say, I want you to review the job description overnight, then review your resume in line with the job description. And if there's things missing on that resume that you've done that's relevant to the job description, get them on there, add them to your resume, right? Cool. I feel like we made that marginally more interesting than normal, and that's all down to you guys for asking good questions. So thank you. Beryl, unless anybody else has got any other questions, I think we're about done, honestly.
Oh yeah, I'm not sitting on any questions myself. So unless anyone has any other questions that they'd like to ask JP and Alex, I think we're actually going to be ending a half hour early here. Any other ones? Last call. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending. I have been recording this entire session, so I'm going to be sending out the recording of that over the next few days. And you have all of my contact information, and I think JP's contact information is also out there. So if you have any other follow-up questions, any comments whatsoever that you'd like to get to us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all for being so engaged and for being so non-judgmental with my college resume, which should be buried and never see the light of day again. I am so looking forward to speaking with each of you and getting more over the next few days and getting to know you all over the next few weeks. Thank you all. Anything else from you, JP?
No, that is everything. Thank you so much for being so actively participating in that. I appreciate it. Makes it a lot easier for me. So yeah, have a great evening, everybody. And as Beryl says, if you do need to ask any questions directly, Beryl will share my contact details. By all means, reach out.
Thank you all, and thank you, Alex. Bye.
See ya.
Bye. And Ken, I saw your question there.